So, hey everybody. So good to see you all. So, yeah, if you are new, especially, just let me know and others know who you are, where you're from. And it's good to see Paula, Soshina, Frequency Girl, Olof, Karen, Francesca, Hatsi, Sean. Wonderful. So, it's Saturday, June 12th, and what shall we do today? Lorna? I thought what we might do today, if you wish, is to work a little bit more with the embodiment of soul frequencies. We talk about ascension a lot, but this is very different. This is about descension. It's about claiming that who we are is really the soul. The personality, history, memories, life structures, they belong to the soul, and there's a personal identity that goes with it that's limited and temporary. But who we are ultimately is the soul, at least as far as our functional self. And then beyond that, who we are is simply primordial spirit, the one consciousness that moves through all things. So what I'd like to do today is maybe first begin to discover this identity as soul. And then once we have that grounded, then move out into experiencing identity as spirit and ground that. So to ground the soul and the spirit within the human personality structures and within the physical body can be a daily practice. It's a long, many-layered journey, and we've all been on that journey. And in this time of massive transmutation, it's important that we can bring ourselves in more and more. So we're not starting from the human personality and finding our soul or discovering our spirit. It's starting from the other side, as soul, as spirit, incarnating into the physical body. So the soul is a frequency. It's a reflection of the one, and it has its own bodies, its own personality structures that incorporates the incarnational journeys that we've made, all of them. So it's much bigger than a single incarnation. It's the growth and development of a higher personality than the temporary human personality lodged in one physical body. So this we can access by tuning in to a space over the top of the head. So when we're tapping into the window through the Inca traditions, we're actually tapping into that soul presence and inviting that soul presence to come all the way through and bring it through. So, we have that silver cord connecting spirit, soul, or actually connecting soul with body. And then through the different chakras, through the different nadis, into the earth. And then through the different layers of the earth. So the earth is not just physical. There's a physical crustal layer of the earth that also goes through the mantle. But then at around 2,000 kilometers in, we enter into the subtle body of the earth. And time and space operate differently here. And what many people experience as the inner earth, there's many layers of the inner earth. So there's the subterranean inner earth just below the surface, and then there's the etheric earth, and then the causal layer of the earth when you get right down to the core. So what we can do is anchor the soul through the physical body or through the personality structures, through the bubble, into the earth, through the physical, etheric, causal layers of the earth, to the very center of our planet, to the heart of Gaia. And as we do that, it's like a portal opens up within the earth and within your own being, and you simply become this channel. So then it's your personal identity actually starts to change and shift. So rather than identifying so much with this personality structure and the physical body, we are identifying with the soul. It's the soul operating through the structure and body in a way that we're not so attached, we're not so fixated within this temporary form. So, Lorna, Gloria, Rena, Candace, Marianne, Carolyn, everybody. And anytime, as usual, if there's questions or things you want to say, ask, express, I'll see if I can incorporate all of that. So most of you have done different kinds of meditations. We've worked with the Inca practices, Ilahinur. We've done chakra meditations. We've worked with Qigong practices, the microcosmic orbit, Vipassana, working with the cellular structures, the sound current. There's many different forms of meditations, chanting, working with sound directly, audible sound as well as the inner sound. And all of these are preparing the way. They're purifying the channels, they're purifying the chakras and the subtle bodies. They're developing a link between the physical body, the etheric, emotional, mental, causal bodies. So we are a multidimensional being. And as we have full access to all of these different bodies, the physical body, plus for convenience sake, we can put the rest of them together as the light body and merge them together. Then our identity shifts towards the soul. And I've found in my own life that it makes me a little bit uneasy when people say, "How are you?" Because I know what people expect when they ask that question. It's like, a story. And many of us are not identified with a story. So, I create a story. I say, yeah, I did that. My body is feeling this way, or my thoughts and feelings go in such a direction. But that's not me. So when I'm speaking about me, my identification is with the soul operating through the body. And then you can even go beyond that. You can actually enter into identification with the spirit. So this is another level of transition. So we're actually going past the bubble of time and space and entering into that primordial consciousness. It's not before time or beyond space. It simply permeates everything while simultaneously being outside of everything. And this is the ground of consciousness that's so natural for each one of us. It's like the heart of all things. If the mind stops, If there's no feelings, if there's no memories, what's left is that presence. And that presence is always, always there in the midst of everything. We just don't pay attention to it because we've learned to cover up that silence, that stillness, that presence with stories, with thoughts and feelings, emotions, conditioning, fears, all these things that lock us into the matrix of time and space, of human form, and also what is currently known as duality. So once we shift our attention to this other identity, then our human form and identity naturally takes on its proper place. And it's easy, it's effortless, it's joyful, it's fun. We're not trying to make something happen based on desperation, based on fear, based on not feeling good enough, based on the need to achieve something, based on carrying the world's weight upon your shoulders, whatever our stories may be. And we've all done that. I know for myself that much of my identity in the past has been the need to be a server, the need to be helping, serving people, the need to heal. So I identify as a healer, I identify as a therapist, I identify as a writer or mystic or whatever the role might be. But beyond that role, who am I? And when I can shift my center of identity to that, there's no effort. And there's no need to achieve, there's no, the martyr complex that I've had all my life where it's like I'm giving up myself in order to serve others. Or the other way around, where I'm focusing entirely on myself at the expense of others. Either way, that comes from misidentification. And what we're learning now is to let go of all identifications, all roles, all ideas, all conditioning, and then simply be one with soul presence, which is already at one with divine presence. So I'll guide you through a practice where we can just do this. It doesn't come from any one tradition. It's just looking at the way chakras operate. It's looking at the way Mother Earth is layered. Okay, there's some questions. What do you mean by inner sound? Okay, so when you're listening inside yourself, and it starts with inside your own brain, there's a subtle sound. It's not necessarily audible, although it could be, and it's like a hum. It's if you're walking under a power line and you hear that humming of electricity going through the power line, this is like the sound of the soul as it interacts with the nervous system of the human body. So as we focus our attention on the sound current, it intensifies, and you start hearing tones within tones, and focus on the subtlest layers that you can find. And eventually it becomes a fast track to accessing soul. So you can do this. Just close your ears initially, and you hear something. And at first what you hear when you close your ears is the sound of waves. So it's literally like waves lapping up on shore. And then you start listening to the subtler tones, like a bell, like a gong, like a hum. And then it gets even subtler. Then it's like a ringing that permeates the entire body, that moves through every single cell. It's the heart of each cell as the chakras become finely tuned as the nadis become connected to subtle bodies, and in the mind, the brain begins to integrate the different waves. So the alpha, beta, theta, delta, gamma, they all start to harmonize and create a base frequency that permeates all of it. So it permeates the physical, emotional, mental bodies. It works with prana. It activates prana, which is what fuels the etheric body and creates the links between the physical and the higher bodies. And then eventually it's like this as a sound of soul, of that presence. And at that point you start accessing higher levels of the mind. And we've spoken about this in the past, and at some point we can focus on that again. Sean's asking the difference between soul and spirit. Yeah, it depends on what system you're working with. Some use these terms interchangeably and sometimes very indistinctly. The way I see it, the soul is the first spark of creation. So it's within time and space, even though time and space operate differently. So time is much more stretched, space is much more interdimensional, but it's within the boundary of the physical universe. So physical meaning created universe, not 3D physical. And the spirit, the way I define it, is God, um, the God presence within. So it's that one consciousness, primordial Brahman, which permeates all things beyond time space and within time space. So this is the essence. This is the primordial essence of the self. So in the Vedic tradition, when they talk about the self with a capital S, that's spirit. When they talk about higher self, typically we're talking about soul. So higher self with a small s. So it's just the way you use those terms. But there's a distinction. So in a way you could say the spark of that divine self, the first spark that manifests in the human incarnational lineage is the soul. So you distinguish as a human soul in contrast to a tree spirit or a lion soul or whatever it may be. And this human soul then goes through incarnations after incarnations, developing itself, evolving further. So that first spark then becomes through its evolution, it's known as the psychic being. This is the term that Sri Aurobindo uses. So the psychic being is different from that initial spark, and that it's evolved through all these incarnations. It's taken on the lessons and the learning, the training that it needs to move further, to evolve further. And ultimately, it's all about merging the dimensions. So remaining conscious of who you are as divine presence, spirit, through the activity of the soul beyond a single incarnation. So that's the soul presence. And then incarnating that or anchoring that through this personality structure, through the four lower bodies into the earth, where we can be present, grounded, and effective. There used to be a time in my life when I wasn't very grounded. It was like I was opening up so far into this vastness. Um, these chakras were very wide open, but it wasn't able to move through into the lower chakras, into the personality structures. I was in the state of bliss and oneness, but not very grounded and therefore not very effective. So presence is that knowledge of oneness, that divine bliss, fully grounded through the cells of the body, where every cell can be radiant with light. So it's not just the upper chakras, it's the whole body radiant with light. That's our journey. You make it sound so easy. Yeah, it always sounds easier than it is. I don't know how to access that blissful realm. Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. Rena says, you just talked about the soul as being outside of the body, which we can connect with. Is this part of the soul? Because isn't our soul also situated in the chest? Okay, so it's a good question. The location of the soul is not in the body. It can be experienced in the body and must be experienced in the body, but when the body dies, the soul still remains in its own realm. So the realm that the soul inhabits is sometimes known as the causal world. So there's all kinds of bardos or so-called astral worlds, which are the home of the subtle bodies. And they get more and more and more refined as the soul gets more and more refined. And ultimately, as the psychic being becomes more and more integrated through these worlds, through all the different worlds, then we learn to bring our subtle senses wide open, the same way that we are experiencing this physical world through our physical senses. Then we experience the spiritual world with wide open spiritual senses. As the soul drops in, it drops in through the different chakras, and we'll do this as a meditation in a while. It drops in, then it opens up our vision, it opens up our ability to express, it opens up our feeling nature, it opens up our power centers, it opens up our sexual centers, which is also the fluidity, entering the delightfulness of being on the earth. And then it opens up the root chakra, which is about fully anchoring and feeling present and connecting with the mother and expressing all of our divinity here on this earth without fear. Yeah, so as we open that window, the first thing that will happen is the sami, this electrical flow of light, starts to pour in. And if we focus that primarily in the upper chakras, work entirely with the crown, the third eye, you will experience bliss. But in order to integrate that into the body, it needs to come all the way through. Otherwise, what happens is you become a yo-yo. You have this state of bliss and you get attached to that. You start craving that. Then there's times in your life where you feel distant and separate, and you go into a sense of rejection of this state where you split yourself up. And this is what all of us have been doing for a long time. We split ourselves off into divine or human, into right and wrong, good and bad. We get attached to one, we reject the other, and that creates a state of duality. And so in many traditions, enlightenment is identified with the state of bliss. And then people wonder, it's like, okay, now I'm not feeling so blissful, what's wrong? And then feel guilty. And then go into attachment to a certain state and call that state enlightenment or bliss or oneness. No, um, oneness or enlightenment is far beyond a state. It's the presence of God which permeates all things. And no matter how you feel at any given time, no matter what you're thinking, and no matter what you identify with or as. Humans are a unique species. We've learned to create a separation between self and other, and that's not so true in the animal kingdom. Yes, uh, there is a sense of separate existence, but not of separation. There's a web of life where all species find their place and know their place. They're not resisting that. And this is also related to the plant kingdoms and the elemental kingdoms and the oceans and the water kingdoms and the air and the bird kingdoms. Um, and the invisible aspects of all these kingdoms. They are very much in touch with that, very much aware of all of that. And what humans have done, just because we've created this barrier between self and other, what's inside and what's outside, we have split ourselves off from this presence. And this is what we're recovering. So as we bring soul and spirit all the way through down into the earth, we're recovering that connection with all life. This is what Gaia represents to me. When I search for the sound current, I often perceive a spark of light. Does that make sense? Sure. Sound and light do go together. In fact, the auditory and visual senses are very closely connected. And some people have more of a natural connection with vision. Some people have more of a natural connection with auditory senses. Some people are more feeling natured. You feel sensately, or you're more intuitive. It's like even the mind is actually a sense. You receive information through the mind, not by processing necessarily, which is what the rational mind does, but through intuition, which simply picks up signals from beyond the personal self and then incorporates that. How do I clear negativity out of my body? So this is the best practice I know is the Inca work, where you're simply receiving the Sami, letting it move through the four bodies. So Sami clears out Hucha. Hucha is the resistance to the flow, and that simply clears out so-called negativity. But beyond that, to recognize, and this becomes an intellectual exercise, to recognize that our idea of negativity, where we've created a split within reality, where something is positive and something is negative, itself is the illusion. And if we can break out of that illusion of positive and negative as good and bad, then we're breaking out of the hucha, the resistance to flow. So I'm not saying there's a distinction between duality and polarity, and this is important. Duality is when the polarity is split into good and bad, and you get attached to good and you reject the bad, whether it's in yourself or in the world around you, in circumstances or in people, whatever. So with that, the attachment and the resistance comes the idea of good and bad, which leads to what we call duality, which is one of the foundations of third dimensional function. Not the foundation of physical reality, but the foundation of how we perceive physical reality, and that's a big distinction. Once we start breaking out of physical third dimensional reality, so there's physical fourth dimensional, fifth dimensional realities too, which are very different. But once we break out of physical third dimensional reality, then we start stepping into more and more of a polarized perception of creation. So you have yin and yang, you have relativity that is not qualified as good and bad. So you're not attached to one or the other. You allow yourself to be in the flow, in the river of life, in a way that there's no resistance to the spirit in its attempt to fully incarnate, first through the soul, then through the body, then into the earth. So Sean says, that's really amazing. As a child, I remember listening to it, didn't realize what it was, so referring to the sound current. Yeah, and this is such a rapid, it's a fast track to personal freedom. It's like as you start listening to the sound current, it starts off within the brain. It may begin towards one ear or the other. After a while, it starts permeating through the entire head and then down through the entire body. And then there's a single frequency, a single tone of pure light, of pure sound. Sorry, I'm confusing. Not confusing, I'm merging sound and light here. Because in the beginning, they're very, very close. Like right there. And then you're in touch with soul. So now my identification is not with this form, structure, personality, body. I see myself as coming through this form, personality, structure, body, but it's not what I am. Mystic 186 says, how do I ground? I feel off-kiltered and want my chakras to be in alignment, but I don't feel connected. The first 3 chakras especially seem blocked. What can we do? Okay, I'll get to that. Carolyn says the sound I hear is more like an old wheel rotating, and it is always coming with a violet living color, like a living circle. Okay. Yeah, so again, it's like there's a synesthesia here, so the linking up of 2 or more senses. So the sound and the light. So I would say the violet living color is in the upper frequencies of light. So also relating to the upper frequencies of sound. An old wheel rotating. I'm not sure if you're referring to the creaky sound, like a mill wheel, a water wheel. And it changes. So watch for the changes. It may start with something, and then you start listening to more than one tone within that sound, and you focus on the highest tone, the subtlest tone, and then that carries you into the next layer and the next layer, until that's like a really pure vibration that permeates the entire body, that resonates throughout, that unifies the different chakras and different fields, and then locks into the frequency of Gaia, and you become that. Paula's saying, I really have a hard time to accept that evil does not exist. All is love and all is good because God is only good. But how about Satan and all the atrocities that we see in the world? Yeah, I mean, this is important not to be in denial. So yes, there's two levels of reality. On the personality level, it's, we're very much living in a dualistic world of good and evil. And yes, we have a responsibility to resist evil, to further good, to fight the the forces of darkness. Um, at the same time, from the higher dimensional perspective, we can see that it's all part of the journey of oneness. So rather than judging, we're embracing, which doesn't mean necessarily accepting, um, but embracing because I recognize that what's out there is also in here. It's an alchemical process, and what the Inca teachings are about is to take in the hucha. So hucha, remember, is the absence of flow. It's not bad energy, it's the absence of energy that's in motion. And you take in that hucha, you transmute into sami and send it back as flow. So this is, once we learn how to shift our identity into that field, then we can interact in the physical world of good and evil with a different perspective, and therefore we are able to be much more effective. We're not locked into emotion of fear or hatred or despair or grief. Those emotions can keep us stuck in a limited expression of divinity. But once we encompass all of that and see all of that as part of me, because I am all of that, God is all of it. There's no God versus Satan. God is all of that. Which doesn't mean that God is, we are beyond the separation of good and evil. We recognize that the evil comes from it's our own creation, and therefore we have responsibility for it. We take responsibility for it. We do not project that evil onto something else or someone else, whether we call it the devil or Satan or whatever. We take responsibility for what we have created through generations, and we uncreate it and recreate it. So it's a path of alchemy. It's also a path of responsibility. So it's not disappearing into a state of passivity where you simply disappear into bliss. And understand that true bliss cannot be touched by negative, I'm saying negative in quotes, emotions. So bliss is not the opposite of sadness and grief. Bliss can be present within sadness and grief and hatred and fear and all the rest, because you recognize that this is not your ultimate identity. So you feel what you feel and you perceive what you perceive, but you're not identified with that, and that's the difference. And that takes time. It takes a little bit of awareness and training. So that's what we're doing together. As we shift our awareness from the personal self towards the transpersonal self and ultimately towards the divine self, then we are learning to embrace all of it. That's what Ho'oponopono is about. Remember that Hawaiian technique where you can transmute or transform other people's realities by entering fully into it. without any kind of resistance, without any kind of judgment. Um, so as we move towards the divine human species, it's time to release those judgments and break out of the illusion of separation. So this is um, what this journey is about. So it's not, I mean, it's a difficult, it's a tricky question, because it's very easy to go into denial and say, oh, I pretend that none of that exists. I put my head in the sand and just, let the world spin itself into hell. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about um, experiencing my true identity and then anchoring that into the physical world in a way that ripples out. That's what empowerment means for me. Jojo says, at times I hear the humming sound in my head and it becomes so loud and overpowering. Why is this? And then there's someone else says a humming, rotating sound. Someone else says high-pitched ringing in my ears. Okay, that's all fine. It'll change. As you pay attention, it becomes comfortable. So it's not overpowering. It's actually very soothing. Even though it's a very high pitch, it's more like a very soothing relationship that we're building with soul. So the personal self and the soul presence are moving towards each other. And then that becomes a backdrop of everything that the personal self is involved in. So whether I'm walking down the street, speaking with someone on the phone, or, meditating, or using a jackhammer that's loud, it doesn't matter. The tone remains the backdrop of everything, just as the presence, the divine presence, remains as the backdrop of everything. Jaylan says, I see a white light and a sound like me tone, so uniting with my body, and I hear a vibration in my ears. Lovely. Yeah, so again, white light and sound, the me sound, do, re, mi, that sound, I assume. It does unite the body, all the bodies together. It's like the dissonance that many of us experience is because these bodies are disconnected from each other. And as that reconnection begins to happen, we feel at home, because home is the presence of God, and home is the presence of soul that's swimming in the ocean of God. So if soul is a spark, it's the drop entering into the ocean, and God is the ocean returning into the drop. So it's like they don't have to be separate from each other, and they're not. Just in our language, we create so much separation which doesn't really exist. So, yeah, thank you for just being so present with your experiences, your questions, and really taking in all of this. Lisa's here too. All right, so what we're going to do for this exercise today. So many of you are at a window, 6 feet over the top of the head. People define it. So people sometimes talk about the earth chakra and the soul chakra being about half a meter above the head. This is more like 2 meters above the head. So just find that place and open that window as wide as you can. So for those of you who are not so familiar with the Inca work, imagine a bubble of light 2 meters out in all directions, and this window is over the top of this bubble, and you're simply asking that this be opened. And as it opens, you feel this electrical force pouring in all the way through, and all the way through